Welcome back to cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. Today we're talking about how a good pin, your dog's ears, or the perfect meme might be saving your mental health. We live in a culture that worships the big win, the promotion that validates decades of work, the milestone birthday that marks another decade survived and thrived, the life-changing vacation that becomes the highlight reel of your year. When social media isn't busy amplifying anger or fear, social media is busy amplifying this perfectionist narrative. We're constantly seeing curated moments of peak joy, major achievements, and transformative experiences. But what if those things aren't actually what keep us afloat day to day? This episode is about microjoys, tiny, repeated moments that deliver more psychological resilience than we give them credit for. These aren't just cute or quirky lifestyle tips. They represent a fundamental shift in how we understand sustainable well-being, and they're backed by decades of research in positive psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science. If you're burnt out, grieving, distracted, or just tired of waiting for the next big thing to make you happy, this episode's for you. Let's dig into why the small stuff might be doing more heavy lifting for your mental health than you know. We're taught to wait for happiness, to defer our joy until we've earned it through achievement, milestone, or circumstance. This cultural narrative suggests that contentment comes from rare, peak experiences, the kind that make for good stories or perfect Instagram posts. But here's what the research actually shows us. Sustainable well-being isn't built on rare peaks of ecstasy. It's constructed from frequent, low-intensity positive experiences that accumulate over time. This insight comes from decades of work in hedonic psychology, the study of pleasure and happiness. Researchers like Ed Diener and Daniel Kahneman discovered that our emotional baseline isn't determined by how high our highs are, but how often we experience small positives and how effectively we recover from negatives. Think of it this way. If you charted your mood over a typical month, the line likely wouldn't look like a flat baseline punctuated by dramatic spikes during major events. It would likely look much more like gentle waves, small ups and downs that reflect your daily encounters with minor pleasures or minor irritations. The smell of coffee brewing in the morning, the satisfying weight of a perfectly balanced pen in your hand, the moment when sunlight hits your face at exactly the right angle during golden hour, your dog's ridiculous face when they're concentrating on something. These experiences might seem trivial, but they're actually the building blocks of psychological resilience. This doesn't mean you stop celebrating promotions or planning vacations. It means you stop discounting the small moments that happen between those bigger events. They're the scaffolding that helps your mental health stay strong. So, what exactly are microjoys? They're small, often spontaneous moments of authentic delight that arise from direct experience rather than external validation or achievement. We often call them tiny pleasures. Microjoys have several key characteristics that distinguish them from other forms of positive experiences. First, they're self-generated and immediately accessible. You don't need permission, money, or special circumstances to experience the pleasure of clean sheets against your skin or your favorite song coming on the radio. These moments are democratically available. Second, they're sensory and embodied. Unlike the abstract satisfaction of checking something off a to-do list, microjoys often engage your senses directly. The texture of tree bark under your fingers, the sound of rain on the roof, the sight of light filtering through leaves in a specific way that catches your attention. Third, they have emotional authenticity. A microjoy isn't something you think you should enjoy. It's something that genuinely sparks a moment of delight, often unexpectedly. laughing at an absurd meme that perfectly captures the mood and sending it to a friend, watching a squirrel attempt an elaborate acrobatic maneuver just to reach birdseed, feeling the specific satisfaction of organizing something in a way that just pleases your brain. This is different from manufactured dopamine hits we get from social media likes or mobile game rewards. Those experiences are designed to create dependency through intermittent reinforcement schedules. They spike your pleasure quickly, but then they leave you wanting more. Microjoys don't create the same addictive cycle. They land more gently and don't demand escalation. Microjoys are also distinct from gratitude practice. Although they can complement each other, gratitude often involves cognitive reflection on positive aspects of your life, appreciating your health, your relationships, or your opportunities. Microjoys are more immediate and experiential. They're about noticing what's happening right now that brings you a spark of pleasure, however brief. And they're definitely not toxic positivity. Microjoys don't require you to ignore your problems or pretend everything is fine. They're simply moments when something small and good breaks through whatever else is happening. You can be grieving and still notice the way afternoon light creates patterns on the wall. You can be stressed about work or politics and still feel a moment of delight when your dog's ears flop over and look exactly like Dorito chips. These moments are often overlooked precisely because they're not dramatic. But psychological research tells us they might be more psychologically significant than we've recognized as far as building resilience against the everyday lows of life. The formal study of these small positive experiences looks at the psychology of savoring, a learnable psychological skill with measurable impacts on your mental health. When people deliberately pause to notice and extend positive experiences, even tiny pleasures, they report higher levels of life satisfaction, increased positive affect, and better emotional regulation. Here's what happens neurologically when you savor one of life's tiny pleasures. The act of conscious attention to a positive experience activates regions of the prefrontal cortex associated with emotional regulation and memory consolidation. It also engages the brain's reward pathways, not through the quick spike and crash pattern of addictive behaviors, but through a more sustained, gentle activation that reinforces the neural pathways associated with noticing good things. Research has identified 3 types of savoring: anticipation, looking forward to positive experiences; present moment, fully engaging with current positive experiences; and reminiscence, reflecting back on positive memories. Microjoys primarily engage present moment savoring, but they can also create material for positive reminiscence later. The neuroscience gets even more interesting when you consider how savoring interacts with hedonic adaptation, which is our brain's tendency to adjust to positive experiences and stop noticing them over time. This is why the excitement of a new job or a new relationship tends to fade as it becomes familiar. But savoring can slow down this adaptation process. When you consciously attend to small positive experiences, you're essentially telling your brain, this matters, pay attention to this, remember this. You're actively working against your neural tendency to tune out the familiar and the pleasant. Recent studies of savoring interventions show consistent benefits across diverse populations. Brief savoring exercises, as simple as taking time each day to notice and appreciate small positive moments, reliably boost psychological well-being and reduce negative affect, even in people dealing with chronic stress or depression. The effects aren't huge, we're not talking about miracle cures here, but they're consistent and they're cumulative. This means small improvements in daily mood regulation compound over time into more significant changes in overall life satisfaction and resilience. The more you exercise your savoring muscle, the better it's going to get. From a memory and attention perspective, microjoys have several characteristics that make them particularly sticky, likely to be encoded and remembered if you've exercised your savoring muscle. First, they often involve a small moment of novelty or contrast. Your brain is constantly filtering information, paying attention to what's new, different, or unexpected. A microjoy often represents just a small disruption in routine, a particularly beautiful cloud formation, an unexpectedly funny interaction, a moment when familiar smells just hit you differently. This novelty makes the experience more likely to register consciously, and with practice, to be stored in memory. Second, they're often multi-sensory. Experiences that engage multiple senses simultaneously are encoded more richly in our memories. The tiny pleasure of a perfect bite of food involves taste, smell, texture, and sometimes even sound. The joy of petting an animal engages touch, sight, and often the emotional reward of social connection. Third, microjoys frequently occur when you're in a receptive attentional state. They tend to happen during those moments of relative calm or openness, when you're walking, transitioning between activities, or when you're with a group of friends or family members who make you feel safe, or when you're engaged in a routine task that doesn't require intense cognitive focus. This receptive state allows for the kind of broad, open attention that notices small positive details. Here's where it gets a little more interesting for mental health. When you're experiencing stress, anxiety, or depression, your attention tends to narrow. You become hypervigilant to threats or problems, and your brain filters out a lot of potentially positive information. This is adaptive in the short term. It helps you focus on solving your immediate problem, but it becomes problematic if it becomes chronic. Microjoys can serve as tensional anchors, small positive experiences that break through this narrowed focus and remind your nervous system that not everything in your environment is a problem. They provide evidence that good things still exist and are still accessible to you. This is why a single sensory experience, a specific smell, a particular quality of light, a moment of physical comfort, can sometimes shift your entire emotional state. It's not that a tiny pleasure solves all of your problems, but it temporarily interrupts the mental loop of stress or rumination and gives your nervous system a different kind of information to process. The dopamine system is also involved here, but not in the way you might expect. Rather than creating a huge spike followed by a crash, microjoys seem to provide reward prediction error. Small, pleasant surprises that keep your brain's reward system engaged without overwhelming it. The mental health applications of microjoy awareness become especially important when we're dealing with difficult life circumstances. Grief, burnout, chronic illness, depression, or trauma recovery, those types of things. During these periods, traditional sources of joy or motivation can often feel inaccessible or inappropriate. The idea of practicing gratitude might feel forced or even offensive when you're in genuine pain. Major pleasures like social events, travel, or achievement-based satisfaction might be temporarily out of reach or emotionally unavailable. But microjoys don't require you to be in a good place emotionally to experience them. They're not about forcing positivity or denying difficulty. They're simply about maintaining some connection to the reality that pleasant experiences still exist and are still available to you, even in small doses. Research on positive psychology interventions in clinical populations shows that micropleasure practices can be particularly effective for people with depression, where anhedonia, or the inability to experience pleasure, is a core symptom. When major sources of enjoyment feel flat or unreachable, training attention towards smaller positive experiences can help maintain some connection to pleasure and reward. In grief counseling, therapists often encourage clients to notice small moments of beauty or connection, not as a way to get over their loss, but as a way to remember that their capacity for positive experience hasn't been permanently damaged. A moment of delight watching birds doesn't dishonor the person you lost. It's evidence that your emotional range is still intact. For burnout recovery, microjoys can serve as low demand sources of restoration. When you're exhausted by work or caregiving responsibilities, major self care activities might feel like additional tasks on your to do list. But noticing the way steam rises from your coffee cup or taking 30 seconds to appreciate how soft your sweater feels requires no planning, scheduling, or energy expenditure. The research on this is still developing, but early studies suggest that micro-pleasure practices can function as a form of emotional regulation that's sustainable because it doesn't require external resources or perfect circumstances. From a behavioral psychology perspective, microjoys can also function as intrinsic motivators, positive experiences that make us more likely to repeat behaviors or maintain beneficial habits. This connects to research on temptation bundling, pairing activities that you should do with activities you enjoy. But microjoys take this concept deeper by suggesting that we can learn to find small pleasures within beneficial activities themselves, rather than just pairing them with external rewards. For example, if you want to maintain a meditation practice, but find it boring or difficult, you might begin to notice the microjoy of settling into a comfortable position, the pleasant weight of a blanket around your shoulders, or the satisfying ritual of lighting a candle. These small positive experiences become anchors that make you more likely to return to the practice. This isn't about making everything artificially pleasant. It's about becoming more aware of the pleasures that are already available within the activities that support your well-being. The satisfaction of completing a small organizational task, the physical pleasure of stretching or making some kind of gentle movement, the sensory experience of preparing and eating nourishing food. Habit research tells us that behaviors sustained by intrinsic satisfaction are more resilient than those maintained by external motivation or willpower alone. When a habit has embedded moments of genuine pleasure, you're more likely to maintain it during periods of stress or when your external motivators disappear. Research on habit formation discusses making habits attractive and satisfying. Microjoys represent the internal dimension of this principle, learning to notice and appreciate the small satisfactions that come from taking care of yourself and engaging in activities that align with your values. It is crucial to recognize that microjoys aren't universal. What brings one person a spark of delight might be neutral or even annoying to someone else, and these differences aren't random. They're often tied to neurological, cultural, or personal factors that deserve our respect and attention. Neurodivergent individuals may experience sensory pleasure and microjoys very differently from neurotypical people. Someone with ADHD might find particular satisfaction in fidgeting with textured objects or in the dopamine hit of organizing something in a way very specific to how their brain works. Someone with autism might have intense positive responses to certain sounds, textures, or visual patterns, while finding other commonly pleasant experiences overwhelming or aversive. Sensory processing differences mean that what reads as a gentle, pleasant stimulus to one person might be too intense or too subtle for another. This isn't a deficit, it's valuable information about how to curate personally meaningful positive experiences. People with anxiety or trauma histories might find that some commonly cited microjoys like Being touched by pets or sudden changes in light or sound trigger stress responses rather than pleasure. This doesn't mean microjoys aren't available to them, but it means they need to develop their own personalized understanding of what small experiences feel genuinely pleasant and safe to them. Cultural differences also matter significantly. Some cultures have rich traditions around noticing and appreciating small daily pleasures. The Japanese concept of mano na aware, which is the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of things, or the Danish hygge, which is cozy contentment, the Indian practice of finding joy in simple daily ritual. Other cultural contexts emphasize achievement, productivity, and future-oriented thinking in ways that might make present moment micropleasures feel indulgent or inappropriate. There's nothing wrong with either approach, but it's worth recognizing how cultural messaging affects your relationship with small positive experiences. Individual differences in temperament also play a role. Some people are naturally more attuned to sensory details and environmental changes, while others are more internally focused or goal-oriented. Some people find joy in novelty and stimulation, and others want familiarity and routine. The key is developing your own microjoy literacy, understanding what genuinely brings you small moments of pleasure or relief, rather than trying to force an appreciation for experiences that don't resonate with your particular nervous system or life circumstance. So, how do you make this practical? How do you begin developing greater awareness of the small positive experiences that are already available in your daily life? The first step is simply noticing without judgment. For a few days, pay attention to moments when you feel even a tiny spark of pleasure, satisfaction, contentment, or relief. Don't worry about whether these moments seem significant or worthy of your attention, just notice them. You might discover that you have consistent patterns. Maybe you're very sensitive to certain types of light, or you find certain specific fabrics or textures especially satisfying. Or maybe there are particular sounds that instantly improve your mood. This information is valuable data about how your nervous system responds to different types of stimuli. Some people find it helpful to keep a microjoy log in a note on their phone or a section of a journal, or even just mental acknowledgement of small positive moments as they happen. The act of recording isn't the point, the act of noticing is, though. Others prefer photo documentation, taking pictures not for social media, but just as a way of training your attention towards small visual pleasures. The pattern of shadows on a wall, an interesting architectural detail, your friend in a moment of silliness, or your pet having the zoomies. You can also experiment with deliberate savoring practices. When you notice a microjoy happening, try extending it slightly. If you're enjoying the taste of something, pause and really focus on the flavor. If you're appreciating a moment of comfortable temperature or lighting, take an extra second to just be fully present with the physical experience. The key here is avoiding the trap of making this into another productivity system or self-improvement project. Microjoys aren't about optimizing your happiness or achieving a particular emotional state. They're about maintaining connection with the reality that pleasant experiences exist and are accessible to you, even in small doses, even during difficult times. Remember, this isn't trivial lifestyle fluff. You're building your mental scaffolding. The capacity to notice and appreciate small positive experiences is a form of emotional regulation that costs nothing, requires no special equipment or circumstance, and becomes more available with practice. Your brain isn't always looking for a complete life overhaul or a major breakthrough. Sometimes it just wants acknowledgement that this particular moment contains something worth noticing, whether that's a color, texture, sound, or just a tiny sense of, hey, this is kind of nice. In a world that often feels overwhelming and demanding, the ability to find small pockets of pleasure and peace becomes an act of tiny resistance and self-care. And not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds you that not everything is broken. Thanks for listening to this episode of Cyberspace. This is your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe pay attention to one small thing today that brings you just a moment of delight, however brief, however simple. It's probably doing more for your well-being than you know. And don't forget, subscribe to get an episode every week, and send it to a friend if you think they'd enjoy it.